I'm Ryan Miller, and up until that Tuesday afternoon, I would have told you my marriage was stable. Not perfect, no marriages, but steady. We had a house in Charlotte, North Carolina, a business I'd spent 8 years building from nothing, and what I believed was a partnership built on transparency. The first red flag didn't wave. It blinked. I was at my office reviewing expenses through our shared banking app. Megan and I had always kept finances open. Same login access. Same notifications. It was something we'd agreed on early, no secrets with money. That's why the charge caught my attention immediately. 2 round-trip tickets to Miami. For nights at an oceanfront hotel. Total, $3,842. 17. Transaction note. Work-related. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to, hoping context would magically appear. Megan hated business travel. She complained about airports, about networking events, about packing. If she had a trip coming up, I'd hear about it for days in advance. Yet here was a nearly $4,000 trip booked, and I hadn't heard a word. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was confusion. Maybe it was a surprise. Maybe she forgot to tell me. Maybe I'd been distracted with work and missed it. I forced myself to stay calm. That evening, she went upstairs to shower while I sat in the kitchen pretending to scroll through emails. The house felt strangely quiet. My eyes drifted to the family tablet on the counter, the one synced to our shared chat history and calendars. I wasn't snooping. Not yet. But when I opened the archived family chat thread, the one we hadn't used in months, I saw something that made my chest tighten. Earlier that day, she had typed, "I'm going on vacation with my ex, don't be jealous," face with tears of joy. That was it. No follow-up. No explanation. Just that. My hands went cold. Daniel, her ex-boyfriend from before we met. The one she always dismissed as ancient history. The one she claimed she barely spoke to anymore. At first, I convinced myself it was sarcasm. Maybe an inside joke. Maybe something harmless taken out of context. But something about the tone felt deliberate. When she came downstairs in sweatpants and damp hair, I decided to keep my voice steady. "Hey," I said casually. "I noticed a charge for Miami. Work trip?" She didn't hesitate. "Yeah," she replied, grabbing a glass of water. "Last-minute client opportunity. And Daniel will be there?" She froze for half a second. Not long enough for most people to catch, but long enough for me. "He works with one of the partner firms," she said. "Why?" I swallowed. "You sent a message about going on vacation with your ex." She rolled her eyes instantly. "Oh my God, Ryan. It was a joke." "A joke?" "Yes." Her tone sharpened. "You know how I joke." It didn't really sound like a joke. She set the glass down harder than necessary. "Why are you digging through old chats?" I wasn't digging. It just popped up. "You're being paranoid," she said flatly. "You've been tense for weeks. I can't even make a sarcastic comment without you spiraling." I felt the conversation slipping out of my control. "I'm not spiraling. I just didn't know about Miami." She crossed her arms. "Because I just booked it. And honestly, I didn't tell you yet because every time I mention work travel, you act weird." "Weird how?" "Like this. Suspicious. Controlling." That word landed heavy. Controlling. "You're reading into things that aren't there," she continued. "Maybe you're just stressed, or tired, or bitter. But don't project that onto me." By the end of it, I was the one apologizing. That should have been my second red flag. That night in bed, she fell asleep within minutes. I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. And once I started replaying, couldn't stop. The late fitness classes. She'd come home flushed and energized, not exhausted. Almost euphoric. The new clothes. Expensive dresses that never made it into our closet photos. Items she never wore around me. Her phone used to live face up on the kitchen counter. Now it was always face down. Always locked. A new 6-digit passcode I didn't know. Restaurant charges that didn't make sense for solo meals. Wine pairings for 2. Weekend trips to visit a friend in Tampa. Swimwear purchases in the middle of winter. At the time, I chalked everything up to stress. She'd said work was demanding, that she needed space, that I was hovering. But looking back, her reactions were what unsettled me most. Every question I asked, even simple ones, triggered a defense. How was class? Fine. Why? Who went with you? Why are you interrogating me? It was like she had prepared responses loaded and ready. The more I thought about it, the less crazy I felt, and the more foolish I felt for ignoring it. Something shifted in me that night. Not rage, not heartbreak, clarity. I realized arguing wasn't going to get me anywhere. Confrontation would only give her time to adjust her story. If there was something going on, I needed proof. Not emotion, not assumptions. Proof. The next morning, I stopped asking questions. I watched. I listened. I paid attention to details I'd once dismissed. She noticed the shift too. "You're quiet," she said over breakfast. "Just focused on work," I replied. And that was true, but not in the way she thought. Because if she believed I was controlling before, she had no idea what builder mode looked like. And this time, I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was looking for the truth. Once I stopped confronting, I started noticing. It's amazing what becomes visible when you're no longer trying to protect someone from your own doubts. 3 days after the Miami charge, Megan left for one of her usual fitness sessions. Tuesday, 6:15 p.m. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, grabbed her gym bag, and said she'd be back by 8. I waited exactly 10 minutes before opening our shared phone plan account. We'd added location history years ago when we upgraded the family package. It was meant for convenience, finding each other in crowded places, checking traffic routes. I hadn't looked at it in months. Her device pinged live, but not at the gym. It was across town, a waterfront condominium complex near Lake Wylie. I stared at the map longer than I should have, zooming in and out like it would somehow change the address. Maybe it was a signal glitch. Maybe she stopped somewhere first. I told myself not to overreact. I told myself I'd look ridiculous if I drove there and found nothing. And yet, I grabbed my keys. The drive took 20 minutes. My hands felt steady on the steering wheel, which surprised me. I expected anger. Instead, I felt something colder, like I was stepping into a business transaction. When I pulled into the lot, I stayed in my car. Her location hadn't moved. Building C, 3rd floor. I sat there for almost 40 minutes, watching the entrance without really knowing what I expected to see. Then the door opened, and she walked out. Not alone. She was laughing. Not the polite laugh she used at networking events. Not the forced one she gave me during arguments. This was relaxed, comfortable. Next to her was a man I recognized immediately, even from a distance. Daniel Harper. He looked exactly the way I remembered from old photos. A little older, a little heavier, but unmistakable. They weren't holding hands, but they were close. Too close. The kind of close that belongs to people who don't worry about being seen. She touched his arm as they talked. He leaned down slightly when she said something. They stood like that for several seconds before parting ways. She walked toward the parking lot. He stayed near the entrance. I felt something crack inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean internal break. Still, I didn't move. I waited until she drove off. Then I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I made a phone call. 2 days earlier, when suspicion first started hardening into certainty, I'd looked up a private courier service that specialized in same-day document delivery. Nothing shady, just professional. I called them from the car. "I need a delivery made tomorrow afternoon," I said calmly, "to a residential condo. I want confirmation of the recipient." The woman on the line didn't ask questions. She just took the address. The next day at 2:10 p.m., I received a time-stamped confirmation photo. The delivery had been signed for by Daniel Harper. The image showed him clearly, standing in the doorway of the same condo building. I stared at the photo on my phone. There it was. Not speculation. Not insecurity. Not paranoia. Proof. That night, Megan came home glowing. "Great workout," she said, dropping her bag by the door. I looked up from my laptop and smiled. That's good. She studied me carefully. You're quiet again. Just tired. She nodded slowly, as if assessing whether she believed me. The irony almost made me laugh. For the next week, I went into what I can only describe as builder mode. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't check her phone openly. I documented every charge tied to Miami, every dinner reservation, every transfer from our joint account that aligned with her so-called work obligations. I downloaded statements. I copied confirmation emails from the shared inbox. I marked dates, gym nights that matched the condo location. Patterns began forming. She wasn't being reckless. She was being strategic. That realization hurt more than anything. This wasn't a spontaneous mistake. This was scheduled, planned, maintained. One afternoon, while she was out with a friend, I scheduled a consultation in Raleigh with a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset separations. The drive there felt surreal. I'd built my company from a garage startup to a six-figure operation. Most of our shared wealth was tied to that business. If she planned to leave, she would expect half. The attorney, a woman in her late 40s with a direct, almost surgical tone, listened without interrupting as I laid out everything. Do you have documentation tying shared funds to the affair? She asked. Yes. Flight receipts? Yes. Hotel confirmations? Yes. Location patterns? Yes. She nodded. In North Carolina, financial misconduct can matter during asset division, especially if marital funds were used in a way that harmed shared interests. Harmed shared interests. That phrase stuck with me, because that's exactly what it was. Not just betrayal, financial deception. I left her office with a checklist. Secure business assets. Separate operational accounts. Limit exposure before formal filing. And most importantly, move first. When I returned home that evening, Megan was on the couch scrolling through her phone, smiling at something on the screen. I watched her for a moment. I wondered if she had already built her exit plan. If Miami wasn't just a trip, but a transition, a test run. Later that night, I checked the booking details more closely. 2 tickets. Not refundable. Seats selected together. Ocean View Suite. And in the hotel notes field, one detail that made my pulse steady instead of spike. Celebration weekend. Celebration. That wasn't a business tag. That was personal. Suddenly, her message about going on vacation with her ex didn't feel sarcastic anymore. It felt like a warning disguised as a joke. I closed my laptop slowly. If she was planning to step into a new life, she was going to find out I'd already moved the foundation beneath her feet. And she wouldn't even see it coming. Once I had confirmation, something inside me went quiet. Not numb. Not detached. Focused. Megan thought Miami was the beginning of her clean exit. A soft launch into a new life where she could return home, sit me down, and deliver some rehearsed speech about deserving freedom. She probably imagined tears, maybe guilt, maybe even my confusion while she positioned herself as the brave one for finally choosing happiness. What she didn't know was that I'd already seen the blueprint. 3 days after my meeting with the attorney in Raleigh, I began executing step 1. My company had been structured as a jointly recognized marital asset, but operational control was mine. The attorney had been clear. Move legally, move carefully, and move before formal separation so that exposure is limited without crossing any lines. I spent an entire afternoon in my office restructuring internal holdings. I created a management entity tied solely to future contracts, shifted upcoming revenue streams to that structure, separated intellectual property documentation, filed preliminary paperwork to convert certain operational agreements into individually held assets under legal advisement. Nothing illegal. Nothing hidden, just smart timing. If she wanted half of what I built, she'd get half of what legally existed at the time of filing, not half of the future. That night, Megan came home excited. Guess what? She said, kicking off her shoes. What? I asked calmly. I might extend the Miami trip by a day. There's a networking event that popped up. Sounds productive. She studied me again. You're taking this surprisingly well. Why wouldn't I? She shrugged. Usually you ask more questions. I almost smiled. I trust you. The words tasted like steel. 2 days before her flight, I called our bank. I didn't freeze accounts. I didn't block her access entirely. I did something subtler. I placed spending alerts and temporary transaction thresholds on large withdrawals from the joint credit line, justified under fraud prevention review. Completely legitimate. Common practice. Then I opened a separate personal account and moved a portion of my business reserve funds into it. Funds that were exclusively tied to future contracts under the new management structure. Paper trails were clean. Dates were documented. I wasn't hiding money. I was protecting operational continuity. Meanwhile, I compiled everything else. Hotel confirmations. Airline receipts. The courier delivery signature from Daniel. Location screensh *TS from the condo visits. Restaurant bills tied to evenings she claimed to be at fitness. It wasn't emotional work. Felt like assembling a case file. The night before Miami, she packed carefully. New dresses I'd never seen. The swimwear purchased in January. Perfume she only wore on anniversaries. Don't wait up tomorrow, she said lightly. Early flight. I won't. At 5:30 a.m. She left. I watched her car disappear down the street. Then I made my call. My attorney had already drafted preliminary separation paperwork based on irreconcilable differences and financial misconduct considerations. We'd prepared the filing but held it until confirmation of travel. Timing mattered. By 9:15 a.m., while Megan's plane was somewhere over Georgia, the documents were formally submitted. By noon, notification letters were prepared for service. By 2 p.m., our bank had processed an update. Large transaction approvals now required dual authorization. At 4:30 p.m., I received confirmation that a notice had been queued for delivery to her registered email. Standard procedural communication acknowledging filing. She landed in Miami at 6:12 p.m. At 6:47 p.m., my phone buzzed. What is this? I didn't respond immediately. Another message came through. Ryan, why am I getting legal notifications? I let her wait. Then I typed, check your email carefully. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, you filed for divorce? Are you insane? I read the message twice before answering. No, I'm prepared. 5 minutes passed. Then my phone rang. I declined the call. She texted instead. We need to talk. We will, I replied. When you get back. You're overreacting. That word again. Overreacting. I stared at the screen, then typed one final message. The Miami trip, the condo, the shared funds. We'll discuss all of it. Silence. Then, you've been spying on me? No, I wrote. I've been paying attention. An hour later, my attorney confirmed that a formal financial disclosure request had been attached to the filing, including itemized documentation of shared expenditures tied to non-marital activities. Translation: she would need to account for every dollar spent, including flights, hotel, gifts, restaurants, transfers. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. 2 days into her celebration weekend, a process server delivered official divorce papers to the Miami hotel front desk, addressed directly to her name. That part wasn't theatrical. It was procedural, but I knew it would hit differently. Later that evening, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Her voice was tight. How could you do this while I'm out of town? I leaned back in my chair. How could you book a celebration weekend with your ex using our shared account? Silence. Then anger. This isn't what you think. I've seen enough. You're trying to humiliate me. No, I said evenly. I'm protecting myself. Her breathing sharpened. You're going to regret this. I almost laughed at that. I already did. That's why I moved first. She hung up. The next morning, my attorney informed me that Daniel Harper's financial link had surfaced during preliminary review. Some of the hotel and transfer payments had passed through his affiliated account before reimbursement. which meant one important thing. He wasn't just a participant. He was aware of the financial concealment. That mattered legally. When Megan returned to Charlotte 3 days later, she didn't come home. She went straight to her sister's house. And for the first time in months, the house felt quiet in a different way. Not tense. Not uncertain. Resolved. I walked through the living room slowly. No raised voices. No rehearsed defenses. No shifting blame. Just space. I didn't destroy anything. I didn't burn photos. I didn't celebrate. I simply sat at the kitchen table where this all began, where I first saw that Miami charge and realized something important. I hadn't sought revenge. I had reclaimed control, and I had stopped financing someone else's new life. Megan didn't come home the night she landed back in Charlotte. I found that out through silence. No car in the driveway. No suitcase rolling across hardwood floors. No forced confrontation waiting in the kitchen. Instead, I received a short message around 9:40 p.m. "I'm staying at my sister's for now. For now." I stared at those 2 words longer than I should have. It was almost ironic. She still thought she controlled the pacing of this. The next morning, my attorney forwarded confirmation that Megan had officially retained counsel. That part didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was the tone shift in her response filing. At first, she had contested the timing, calling my actions emotionally reactive. But once the financial documentation was attached, the itemized record of shared funds used for flights, hotel stays, private dinners, gifts, and unexplained transfers, the language changed. No more outrage. Now it was negotiation. Her lawyer requested mediation. Not reconciliation. Mediation. That told me everything. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other in a neutral conference room in Raleigh. She looked tired. Not dramatic. Not furious. Just worn. For a brief moment, I saw the woman I married. Not the strategist who planned Miami. Not the one who rehearsed her defenses. But someone realizing the narrative had slipped out of her hands. "Ryan," she started quietly, before the session formally began. "We didn't have to do this like this." I kept my voice even. "You mean before or after Miami?" Her jaw tightened. It wasn't a celebration. Then what was it? Silence. The mediator guided us through asset division. The house, retirement accounts, vehicles, personal property. When it came to my business, her attorney made the expected argument: emotional support, shared lifestyle contribution, marital asset entitlement. My attorney calmly presented documentation showing restructuring dates prior to filing, operational separation, and clear financial misconduct tied to non-marital expenditures. It wasn't aggressive. It was factual. At one point, Megan finally spoke directly. "I supported you for years," she said. "Emotionally, through stress, through startup chaos." I met her eyes. "And I supported you financially while you were building a second relationship." The room went quiet. That wasn't an attack. It was a statement. The final agreement took another month. She received a legally justified portion of shared marital assets. Savings accrued during our marriage, certain liquid accounts, and personal property she could document as joint acquisition. She did not receive half of future contracts. She did not receive ownership of my company. She did not receive reimbursement for the Miami trip. In fact, part of that expense was formally recognized as misuse of marital funds and adjusted within settlement calculations. Daniel was briefly drawn into financial review because of payment routing evidence. It never became a public spectacle, but it forced disclosure. The divorce was finalized quietly. No screaming, no courtroom theatrics, just signatures. The day I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light, but the house didn't feel that way. Every room carried echoes. The couch where she used to sit scrolling through her phone. The kitchen table where I first saw the Miami charge. The bedroom that once felt like partnership and later felt like strategy. I realized something important. Winning legally didn't erase emotional residue. So I made another decision. 3 months after the divorce finalized, I sold the house. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I didn't want a museum of suspicion. I didn't want to sit in rooms that once hosted doubt. I bought land closer to the mountains outside Asheville. Smaller place, fewer rooms, more quiet. I rebuilt deliberately. Simpler furniture, minimalist layout, no shared accounts, no emotional guessing games, just structure. People have asked me if I regret how I handled it, if I should have confronted her sooner, if I should have tried counseling before filing. Maybe, but here's what I know. When I first asked about Miami, she didn't reassure me. She redirected blame. When I questioned her message about vacation with her ex, she labeled me controlling. When I calmly asked for honesty, she framed it as insecurity. The affair wasn't the first betrayal. The gaslighting was. By the time I filed, the marriage wasn't collapsing. It had already been replaced. I didn't destroy something healthy. I refused to fund something dishonest. A year later, I ran into a mutual acquaintance at a networking event in Charlotte. He mentioned Megan had moved to Florida. Miami, actually. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't ask about Daniel. I didn't need to. Whatever life she chose, it wasn't financed by my silence. I've started dating again, slowly, carefully, not suspicious, but observant. There's a difference. I don't check phones. I don't track locations. But I pay attention to consistency, to tone shifts, to rehearsed defensiveness. Because I learned something valuable through all of it. Trust isn't blind. It's earned daily. And if someone flips the script to make you feel irrational for asking reasonable questions, that's not love protecting itself. That's guilt defending itself. Sometimes people think strength is loud, that revenge requires spectacle. But the most powerful moment of my life wasn't sending divorce papers to a hotel. It wasn't restructuring my business. It wasn't watching her face when the narrative shifted. It was the moment I stopped arguing and started thinking. The moment I chose preparation over reaction. The moment I reclaimed control without raising my voice. I didn't seek revenge. I sought stability. And in the end, that was enough. I thought selling the house would close the chapter. Didn't. Quieted things, sure. The mountains helped. The air felt cleaner. The mornings didn't carry tension. I built routines that belonged entirely to me. Early hikes, black coffee on the porch, calls with clients that didn't bleed into midnight arguments. But clarity has a strange side effect. Once the chaos fades, you start replaying the details without adrenaline. About 6 months after the divorce finalized, I was going through archived digital files, mostly business documentation, when I found something I'd missed, an old shared cloud folder. We used it years ago for tax returns and insurance scans. I hadn't opened it since before Miami. Inside was a subfolder labeled Personal. I almost didn't click it, but I did. There were photos, not romantic ones, not explicit, just **TS. Conversations exported, saved, between Megan and Daniel. And the timestamps hit me immediately. They didn't start the year of Miami. They didn't start months before the condo. They started nearly 18 months earlier. Back when she first began staying late at work. Back when I thought she was just stressed. The early messages weren't dramatic. Miss talking to you. Funny how life circles back. You look good. Then gradually, I wish things were simpler. I think about what could have been. I don't regret us. My jaw tightened reading that one. Because during that same time we were planning a vacation to Napa. We were discussing kids. We were sitting across from a financial advisor mapping out long-term goals. And she was rewriting history with someone else. What bothered me most wasn't the emotional tone. It was the patience. The slow build. This wasn't a spontaneous reconnection. It was cultivated. One message about 9 months before Miami stopped me cold. Daniel, if you ever decide you're done pretending, I'd be ready. Megan, I'm not ready yet, but I'm thinking, while sleeping next to me, while encouraging me to expand the business, while telling me I was distant. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. It would have been easier if Miami had been the start. But it wasn't. Miami was the exit. The runway had been paved long before. For a moment, just a moment, I felt anger surge again. Not explosive, sharp, but it passed quickly. Because here's the thing. Finding those messages didn't hurt the way I expected. They confirmed something I'd already learned. The marriage didn't collapse suddenly. It eroded quietly while I was still investing in it. A week later, I ran into Megan unexpectedly. Not in Miami. Not in Charlotte. In Asheville. I was leaving a cafe when I heard my name. Ryan. I turned. She looked thinner. Not unhealthy, just lighter. Different haircut. Florida tan faded. What are you doing here? I asked calmly. Visiting friends, she said. I heard you moved. I nodded. We stood there for a moment that felt longer than it was. There was no hostility in her eyes. No smugness. Just something reflective. I didn't expect you to move this far, she said. I didn't expect Miami either, I replied. She flinched slightly. I deserved that. We didn't sit down. We didn't rehash. But she surprised me when she said, You were right to move first. I didn't respond. She continued, I thought you'd fight. Or beg. Or try to fix it. When you filed, it scared me. That was the point. She gave a small, almost sad smile. I underestimated you. That part oddly felt honest. For years I'd been the stable one. The builder. The predictable one. Maybe she thought I'd stay that way no matter what. We stood there another minute. I'm not with Daniel, she added quietly. I studied her face. That doesn't change anything. I know. And I realized something in that moment. I wasn't curious. I didn't need updates. Whatever happened between them, whether it lasted or collapsed, was no longer my concern. I hope you're doing okay, she said finally. I am. And I meant it. When she walked away, I didn't feel closure. I felt distance. Healthy distance. That night, sitting on my porch in the mountains, I thought about what strength actually is. It's not surveillance. It's not legal maneuvering. It's not even filing first. Strength is recognizing when someone is preparing to replace you and choosing not to compete. She had built an exit plan. I built protection. She rehearsed narratives. I gathered documentation. She framed doubt as insecurity. I reframed it as data. In the end, the difference wasn't who loved harder. It was who prepared smarter. A year ago, I would have thought revenge meant humiliation. Now I understand something different. The real shift wasn't serving papers in Miami. It wasn't separating assets. It wasn't winning mediation. It was the moment I stopped trying to be chosen. The moment I decided I didn't need to compete for my own marriage. That changed everything. I don't hate her. I don't obsess over Daniel. I don't replay arguments in the shower. But I do carry one permanent adjustment. When something feels off, I don't argue about it anymore. I verify, quietly, calmly, and if the truth doesn't match the words, I move. No speeches, no drama, just action. Because if there's one thing Miami taught me, it's this. The person who moves first doesn't always win. But the person who moves prepared never loses control. About 3 months after I ran into Megan in Asheville, I received an unexpected email from my attorney. It wasn't dramatic, just procedural. Daniel had filed for bankruptcy in Florida. During financial review, prior transfers connected to Megan surfaced again. Nothing that threatened me legally, but enough to reopen documentation trails. For a split second, I felt that old tension return. Not fear, just the awareness that unfinished stories sometimes echo back. My attorney assured me everything had been properly disclosed during the divorce. I was protected. Still, the timing struck me. Miami hadn't been the stable new beginning she imagined. It had been built on momentum, not foundation. That night, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt validated. Preparation isn't paranoia. It's insurance. And once again, I was glad I had chosen structure over emotion. A year after the divorce, I stood on the porch of my new place, watching the fog roll over the mountains, when my phone buzzed. It wasn't Megan. It was someone new, Claire. We'd been seeing each other slowly, no rush, no dramatic declarations. Just consistency. She didn't guard her phone. She didn't over-explain. When something bothered me, She answered without turning it into my flaw. That difference felt massive. One evening she asked, "What changed you?" I thought about Miami, about the condo, about the word controlling thrown like a shield. I stopped arguing with doubt, I told her. I started listening to it. She nodded like that made sense. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't watching for cracks. I was building again.